Your child. Decoded. Why your child is exactly who history said they would be, and what 3,000 years of evidence say you can actually change. By learning why there is gap between you and your child, you can bridge that gap before it grows any wider. Understand what is actually happening beneath the surface, so you can respond the way you genuinely intend to, and perhaps, for the first time, build the kind of relationship with your child that looks nothing like the distance you felt growing up. Think about the last time you looked at your child and felt a kind of helplessness that surprised you. Not anger, not frustration, something quieter than that. The feeling that what is happening in your home right now, the shutting down, the explosions, the distance, or the desperate clinging, is something you do not fully understand. Something that feels too big and too old to have started with you. And yet somehow you are the one standing in the middle of it. That feeling is not a weakness. It is actually one of the most accurate things you have ever sensed about your family. Because what you are living right now, that pattern, whatever it is, did not start with you. It did not start with your parents. It is older than all of you. And the most important thing I want you to understand before we spend the next 30 minutes together is this. It has been documented. It has a name. And history shows clearly, specifically, and across every civilization that ever tried to understand it, that it can be interrupted. My name is not important right now. What is important is what I am about to show you. Because this channel exists for one reason only. Not to give you parenting tips, not to offer you devotional comfort, but to investigate the way a documentary filmmaker investigates the patterns that shape children. The real patterns. The ones that researchers have spent careers measuring, that historians have spent decades uncovering in the ruins of civilizations, and that ancient wisdom literature identified thousands of years before the first university opened its doors. History, developmental science, and biblical wisdom do not agree on many things, but they agree on this. The way a child is raised shapes everything, every relationship, every decision, every moment they stand at a crossroads as an adult and choose which direction to walk. And the forces that shape a child were not invented in the 20th century. They were not discovered by modern psychology. They were named, they were studied, they were argued about and recorded, and in some cases written on the walls of buildings that have been standing for 3,000 years. What I am going to show you today is the full picture, not a piece of it. The full arc from ancient civilizations through modern research to the specific dynamics that may be playing out in your home right now. This is the investigation. And by the time we reach the end of it, my intention is that you will be able to look at your child or at your own childhood and finally understand what you are actually seeing. Before researching to make this video, I personally had questions. I wondered why my siblings and I were obviously treated differently. I wanted to understand how the same parent's demeanor, voice, and attitude could switch instantly about a situation, based solely on which child was involved. I got my answers and shared them in this video. Let us start at the very beginning. Not the beginning of parenting, the beginning of recorded human civilization's attempt to understand what children actually need. Part 1. What history documented about children. In the city of Ur, in what is now southern Iraq, archaeologists have uncovered records going back more than 4,000 years. Clay tablets, household inventories, legal documents. And inside this documentation of daily life in one of the world's first cities, researchers found something that nobody expected. Systematic records of how children were raised, educated, transferred between households, and in some cases, abandoned. The Sumerians, the civilization that invented writing itself, left behind some of the oldest documented evidence of what happens to children when their early environments are shaped by fear, transaction, and emotional distance. Be forewarned, what the records show is not easy to read. Children in ancient Mesopotamia were understood primarily as economic assets. A child's value was measured in what they could produce in labor, in trade skill, in the alliances their marriage might secure for a family. The emotional life of a child was not a category that the ancient Mesopotamian household tracked. What was tracked was output. What was tracked was utility. And researchers examining these records alongside the developmental outcomes of children raised in similar conditions in modern studies have documented a consistent pattern. When a child's primary experience of their caregiver is transactional, when love is conditional on performance, when presence is connected to productivity, the developing brain responds in specific, measurable ways. Developmental psychologists have recorded that the stress response systems of children raised in conditional approval environments show significantly elevated cortisol patterns, the chemical signature of chronic low-grade threat. The brain, in other words, learns to stay on guard, because connection might disappear at any moment if performance drops. This is not ancient history in the sense of being irrelevant. This is ancient history in the sense of being the first documentation of a pattern that researchers now see in family systems every single week. The Sumerian household did not invent conditional love, but they left behind some of the oldest written evidence of what it produces. Move forward 1,000 years to ancient Egypt. Here the records are different in character but consistent in theme. Egyptian papyrus documents and tomb inscriptions give us a picture of childhood that is, in some ways, more tender than the Mesopotamian record. Egyptian children appear in artwork, playing games, being held, receiving instruction from parents who are depicted with visible affection. But the deeper documentation, the wisdom literature of ancient Egypt, the texts known as the Maxims of Ptah-hotep, and the instructions of Amenemhat, reveals something that cuts directly against that warm surface image. The Egyptian wisdom literature is, at its core, a sustained argument that the primary job of a parent is to equip a child for survival in a hierarchical world. The affection documented in the art was real, but the purpose of that affection, as recorded in the texts, was instrumental. You raised a child so that the child could serve the family's position in society. You expressed warmth so that the child would remain loyal, obedient, and useful. The emotional life of the child was not the point. The social function of the child was the point. Developmental researchers studying what they call secure base formation, the process by which a child learns whether the world is fundamentally safe, have documented that children who receive affection as a tool of social management rather than as a genuine response to their personhood develop a particular kind of relational confusion. They learn to read environments for hidden agendas. They become skilled at performing the emotions that adults want to see. And they struggle, often for decades, to trust that any relationship is genuinely unconditional. Move forward again, this time to ancient Rome, and the documentation becomes even more precise. Roman household records, legal texts, and the writings of Roman philosophers give us one of the most detailed pictures of childhood in the ancient world. And what those records show is a civilization that had thought very carefully about children and had arrived at conclusions that developmental science now identifies as profoundly damaging. The Roman paterfamilias, the male head of the household, held what Roman law called vitae necisque potestas, the power of life and death over every member of his household, including his children. This was not a metaphor. This was legal reality. A Roman father could expose an unwanted infant, sell a child into slavery, or disinherit a grown adult child, and the law would support him. Children were not persons under Roman law. They were property. What is remarkable is that Roman writers knew something was wrong with this. The philosopher Seneca, writing in the 1st century, observed that the harshness with which Roman fathers treated their children produced men who were, in his words, either broken or dangerous. Either they had been crushed into submission and would spend their lives seeking approval from anyone who resembled their father, or they had learned to hide their real selves so completely that they were capable of any cruelty when power finally came into their hands. Seneca was not doing developmental psychology. He was observing patterns in the men he knew. But what he described maps with striking precision onto what researchers now call the two primary attachment trauma responses: anxious attachment and avoidant attachment. Chronic anxiety of the child who learned that love might be withdrawn at any moment, and the emotional shutdown of the child who learned that vulnerability was too dangerous to risk. From my own personal experience, I can tell you I have friends that I can remember going from happy kid to miserable kid in 1 second, based on what their mother or father said or threatened. From my perspective, it is not easy for a child to grow up believing they can be disposed of at a whim, based on the inexperienced decisions of the child. Okay, let's continue. Now let's cover the historical record that almost nobody talks about when they discuss ancient parenting. The medieval European world, from roughly the 5th century through the 15th century, operated on a principle that historians of childhood have documented extensively and that developmental researchers find consistently alarming. The principle was this: childhood ended at 7. The French historian Philippe Aries spent decades examining medieval art, legal documents, and household records and published findings that upended the modern assumption that childhood has always been understood the way it is today. What Aries documented, and what subsequent historians have confirmed with additional sources, is that medieval European society did not really have a concept of childhood as a distinct developmental phase, requiring special protection and specialized treatment. By age 7, a child was dressed as a small adult. By age 7, a child was expected to work alongside adults. By age 7, a child was held to adult standards of behavior, adult levels of emotional regulation, and in many households, adult levels of religious obligation. The consequences of this have been documented by developmental researchers studying what happens when children are pushed prematurely into adult functioning. The brain's prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for emotional regulation, planning, and impulse control, is not fully developed until the mid-20s. When a child is required to perform adult emotional regulation before that architecture is in place, the developing brain finds workarounds. It suppresses, it dissociates. It builds what researchers call rigid coping structures, patterns of emotional management that work in childhood but become liabilities in adult relationships, because they were never meant to be permanent. They were emergency scaffolding that the child was never given permission to dismantle. Medieval children who survived into adulthood, having skipped the protected developmental phase that childhood is now understood to require, and many did not survive, given the staggering child mortality rates of the period, carried those rigid coping structures into their own parenting. They raised their children the same way they had been raised, not out of cruelty, but out of genuine belief that this was how human beings were supposed to develop. The pattern reproduced itself across generations because nobody had the framework to see it for what it was. Until, that is, you look at what was being written during this same period by people who were reading something far older than medieval law. Part 2. What ancient wisdom already knew. If you are a card-carrying Christian or not, there is no denying that the Bible is full of ancient wisdom that carries through until today. And you don't have to be a Christian to learn from it, or fear being lectured by a Christian to benefit from it. Let's look at the book of Proverbs in the Hebrew Scriptures, compiled over a period of several hundred years, drawing on wisdom traditions that are even older. And inside that compilation, there is a verse that has been quoted so many times that most people who have heard it have stopped actually reading it. The verse, from Proverbs chapter 22, is typically translated into English as, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old he will not depart from it." The word translated as train in that verse is the Hebrew word chanak, and chanak does not mean what the English word train implies to a modern reader. It does not mean discipline into compliance. It does not mean instructing toward correct behavior. The original agricultural meaning of chanak was to create a taste for, to introduce something to a child in a way that makes them desire it from the inside. It referred to the practice of a midwife who would crush a date and rub it on the palate of a newborn to stimulate the sucking reflex to awaken an appetite that would sustain the child's life. The point of chanak was not external compliance, it was an internal desire. What the ancient wisdom writer was recording was a developmental principle that child psychologists would not formally articulate until the 20th century, that the goal of raising a child is not to produce a child who behaves correctly when they are watched. The goal is to produce a child who has internalized a genuine desire for what is good, who chooses well, not because they fear consequences, but because they have been helped to discover what actually satisfies them at the deepest level. This is what developmental researchers call intrinsic motivation, the internal drive that produces durable behavior change, as opposed to extrinsic motivation, the external reward or punishment that produces compliant behavior that evaporates the moment the reward or punishment is removed. Studies have documented consistently that children raised primarily through external control show significantly lower self-regulation as adults than children who were helped to develop genuine internal values. The ancient Hebrew writer did not have access to those studies, but the principle they were articulating was identical. Go further into the Hebrew wisdom tradition, and the principle deepens. The 6th chapter of Deuteronomy, one of the most extensively studied passages in the Hebrew scriptures, gives one of the most specific parenting instructions in ancient literature. And what makes it remarkable is not its content so much as its structure. The text does not say, teach your children at a specific time, in a specific way, with a specific curriculum. It says, speak of these things when you sit, when you walk, when you lie down, when you rise. Formation was meant to be woven into the texture of ordinary daily life, not scheduled into special teaching moments. Attachment researchers studying what they call serve and return interaction, the 10-second back-and-forth exchanges between a parent and child that are now understood to be the primary architecture of secure attachment, have found that what matters most in child development is not the quality of the big moments, it is the density of the small ones. Not the family vacation, the conversation in the car on the way to school, not the carefully planned family dinner, the moment you stop what you are doing and actually look at your child when they say your name. Deuteronomy 6 was not describing a teaching curriculum, it was describing a pattern of presence. And that pattern of presence, the ordinary, daily, interruptible, inconvenient kind, is what developmental science has since identified as the single most powerful determinant of how a child's brain organizes itself for relationships. Not in spite of being scattered across ordinary moments, because of it. Now look at the New Testament record. When the disciples of Jesus, who were themselves operating inside the Roman culture we examined earlier, the culture of the paterfamilias, where children were property, tried to prevent children from approaching Jesus during his public ministry. The gospel accounts document something that would have been genuinely shocking to any first-century Roman observer. Jesus did not simply allow the children to approach, he rebuked his own disciples for trying to keep them away. And the language of that rebuke, in the Greek text, is the same language used elsewhere in the Gospels when Jesus rebukes demonic forces. In a culture where children had no legal standing, where their emotional lives were not a consideration of household management, where a child's primary function was economic, a rabbi stopping to hold children, blessing them individually, and then using them as the primary illustration of what genuine faith actually looks like, was not a sentimental gesture. It was a public statement about the nature of personhood. Children were not lesser people waiting to become full people. They were the models. What they had the capacity for trust, for wonder, for genuine relationship uncomplicated by performance, was what every adult in that crowd needed to recover. Developmental researchers studying what they call psychological safety, the internal sense that it is acceptable to be exactly who you are in this relationship, have documented that children who experience genuine psychological safety in their early attachment relationships show measurably greater capacity for creativity, risk-taking, emotional regulation, and long-term relational satisfaction. They are, in other words, better at being human. Not despite having been treated as full people with genuine emotional lives, because of it. I personally fight with the idea of trying to force my adult children to make decisions based on what I believe is best. I try to remember that they are their own person first and my grown children second, and because of this, I try to guide instead of demand. I can say I've never made the mistake of thinking, saying, or implying that either of my children were less than me. Part 3. The patterns running in your home right now. Everything we have covered so far has been historical and theoretical. Now I want to bring it directly into your house. Because the patterns we have been examining across 4,000 years of human civilization are not museum pieces, they are alive. They are operating in specific, recognizable ways in your home right now. And the reason most parents cannot see them is not that they are invisible, it is that they are so familiar that they do not register as patterns at all, they register as normal. Let me describe a few of them specifically so that you can check whether you recognize them. The first pattern is what researchers call conditional regard, the dynamic in which a child's sense of being loved and valued fluctuates based on their behavior. This is the ancient Sumerian dynamic. This is the Roman paterfamilias dynamic. And in modern families, it does not usually look like cruelty. It looks like a parent who is visibly warmer after a good report card than after a bad one. It looks like a parent whose face lights up at achievement and goes quiet at failure. It looks like a child who has learned to monitor a parent's emotional temperature as carefully as a meteorologist monitors a storm, because their own sense of safety in that relationship depends on predicting it correctly. Developmental psychologists have documented that children in conditional regard environments spend significant cognitive resources on parental emotional monitoring resources that are then unavailable for learning, creativity, and the development of their own identity. These children often become highly socially perceptive adults. They can read a room with remarkable accuracy. But that skill was forged in anxiety, and it tends to come packaged with a difficulty in relaxing enough to ever simply be in a room without scanning it. The second pattern is what researchers call emotional dismissal, the dynamic in which a child's emotional experience is consistently minimized, redirected, or treated as a problem to be solved rather than an experience to be witnessed. This is the medieval European dynamic. This is the dynamic of the household where big feelings were treated as weakness, where crying was met with correction rather than comfort, where a child learned that their inner emotional life was not a welcome guest in this family. Studies on what psychologist John Gottman called emotion coaching, the practice of naming, validating, and helping children navigate their emotional experiences, rather than eliminating them, have documented that children who receive emotion coaching show significantly better outcomes in self-regulation, academic performance, peer relationships, and physical health than children whose emotions are consistently dismissed. This is not a small effect. Gottman's research followed families for years and found that the single most powerful variable in a child's long-term well-being was not intelligence, not discipline, not even economic security. It was whether their emotional experience was taken seriously by the adults who mattered most to them. The third pattern is what attachment researchers call narrative poverty, a family system in which the story of the family is never told, where children do not know who their grandparents were or why their parents make the choices they make, where the chain of human experience that produced this particular child is never articulated. This is the opposite of the ancient Hebrew pattern from Deuteronomy 6, where the instruction to tell the story to speak of where you came from and what your people have learned was woven into the daily rhythm of family life. Developmental researchers studying what they call narrative identity, the child's internal story of who they are and where they come from, have found that children with a rich family narrative show significantly greater resilience in the face of difficulty. They know that hard things have happened to people they are connected to, and those people survived. That knowledge does not protect them from difficulty, but it gives them a framework for it. They are not the first person in their line to face something hard, and the knowledge of that, the felt sense of being part of a story longer than their own experience, turns out to be one of the most powerful psychological stabilizers a child can possess. The fourth pattern, and the one that I want to spend the most time on because it is the one most consistently underestimated by parents, is what researchers call attunement, the quality of a caregiver's responsiveness to the actual child in front of them, rather than to the child they expected, the child they wish they had, or the child they are afraid their child might become. Attunement is the difference between looking at your child and seeing them, versus looking at your child and seeing your anxiety about them. Infant researchers studying the first months of life have documented that the back-and-forth exchange between a caregiver and an infant, the smile that receives a smile in return, the babble that receives a mirroring babble, the cry that receives a calm and responsive presence, is not just emotionally comforting, it is neurologically formative. Each moment of attunement builds what neuroscientists call the social brain, the neural architecture that underlies every relationship a person will ever have. A child whose early experience includes consistent attunement develops a nervous system that defaults to the assumption that other people are basically safe, and that the world is basically navigable. A child whose early experience is characterized by chronic misattunement, not abuse, not neglect in any dramatic sense, but ordinary, steady unavailability, develops a nervous system that defaults to the assumption that other people are unpredictable, and that vigilance is the appropriate permanent setting. None of these four patterns require a bad parent to produce. They require an unexamined parent. They require a parent who is replicating what they received without knowing that there was anything else available, which is what the vast majority of parents throughout recorded history have done, because they did not have access to this investigation. You do. Part 4. What history shows actually changes it. This is the part that most investigations into childhood and parenting leave out. They document what is wrong. They explain why it happened. And then they leave the parent sitting with the weight of it, which is not helpful and is not what this channel is here to do. So, I want to be very specific about what the historical, psychological, and wisdom literature record actually shows about what changes these patterns. Because the answer is not what most people expect. The most intuitive response to everything we have covered is to assume that what changes a damaging pattern is doing the opposite of it. That if conditional regard is damaging, then unconditional affirmation in unlimited quantities is the answer. That if emotional dismissal is damaging, then never setting limits on emotional expression is the answer. That if attunement is the goal, then a parent's complete and permanent availability is what is required. History does not support any of these conclusions, and neither does developmental research. What history shows, across every civilization that produced data on the question, is that the children who develop the greatest resilience, the most durable character, and the deepest capacity for relationships were not raised in environments of unlimited warmth and zero expectation. They were raised in environments of what developmental researchers now call authoritative parenting, a term that is easy to misread because it sounds authoritarian, but means something entirely different. Authoritative parenting combines genuine warmth with clear structure, high responsiveness with high expectations, deep emotional availability with consistent, predictable limits. The ancient Hebrew household, described in Proverbs and Deuteronomy, was not a household without structure. It was a household where structure was embedded in relationships. The instruction was not issued by a distant authority. It was woven into daily life by a parent who was present. The distinction matters enormously, because research on how children internalize values has documented that values transmitted through relationships stick, and values imposed through authority without relationship do not. A child does not adopt the values of their parents because they were told to. They adopt them because they were loved by someone who held them, and the desire to remain connected to that person made the values feel worth holding. The Psalms offer something specific here that is easy to miss. More than a third of the 150 Psalms are laments, honest, unfiltered expressions of pain, doubt, anger, and confusion directed at God. The ancient Hebrew understanding of spiritual and emotional health was not that a healthy person is always peaceful. It was that a healthy person can take the full weight of what they actually feel and bring it into a relationship rather than carrying it alone. The Psalms modeled emotional honesty not as a problem to be managed, but as the foundation of genuine relationships. Researchers studying emotional expression in families have documented that families where all emotions are permitted, including the difficult ones, produce children with significantly better emotional regulation than families where only positive emotions are welcome. This sounds paradoxical until you understand the mechanism. A child who learns that difficult emotions can be expressed and survived, rather than hidden and suppressed, develops a relationship with their own inner life that is fundamentally different from the child who learns to manage their inner life in private. The first child knows that feelings pass. The second child fears that feelings might be permanent because they have never had the experience of bringing a difficult feeling into daylight and watching it become manageable. What changes the pattern, then, is not a technique. Techniques are everywhere. You can find them in any parenting book in any bookstore. What changes the pattern is what we could call an informed presence, a parent who understands what they are actually looking at when they look at their child, who knows what the child's behavior is communicating rather than just reacting to how it presents, who has enough self-knowledge to recognize when their own unresolved history is the lens through which they are seeing their child, and who brings that understanding into ordinary daily life in the small moments that Deuteronomy 6 was describing. History documents this, not as a philosophical position but as an empirical observation. The civilizations that produced the most stable, resilient, relationally capable people were the ones that understood a child as a whole person, rather than as an asset, a project, or a problem. That understanding was not common. It was not even the majority position in most historical periods. But the evidence of what it produces when it was practiced is consistent across every civilization that left behind enough documentation to examine. There are many things I learned from researching this video project. I learned so much more about how and why my parents parented my siblings and myself. I also feel like that even though I genuinely believe I've been a good parent to my own kids, that if I had this level of understanding when they were young, I know I could have been a better one for them. Now, the investigation does not end here. It cannot end here, because the pattern we have been tracing across 4,000 years of human civilization is still running. It is running in your family right now. And the most powerful thing this channel can offer you is not a 30-minute summary of what history and science and ancient wisdom have found. It is the ongoing practice of looking at your child and at your own history through the lens of all three. Because once you can see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. And once you cannot unsee it, you are no longer simply replicating it. You are in a position, for the first time, perhaps, in your family line, to do something different. If what you just watched changed something in how you see your child or yourself, that feeling is worth following. I put together a field guide that takes everything we covered today and makes it immediately usable. The 4 patterns, the history behind each one, the research, and one specific thing you can do this week for each pattern you recognize in your home. It is called the Pattern Identifier, and the link is in the description. Grab it tonight while this is still fresh. Every episode on this channel is a new investigation, a new historical moment, a new psychological finding, a new piece of ancient wisdom, all aimed at the same thing, giving you the clearest possible picture of what is actually happening with the child in your house and what the full record of human history says about it. If something in this investigation changed how you see your child or yourself, that change is worth following. Our next episode is called Why Your Child Shuts Down When You Raise Your Voice. History documented this pattern 3,000 years ago, and it goes even deeper into one of the most misunderstood dynamics in the parent-child relationship. Subscribe now so you do not miss it.